So my background is I'm a primary school teacher to start off with. So I did a Bachelor of Education many years ago, and I was a primary school teacher in Brisbane for a number of years. And then I moved to Melbourne in 2021 and taught in the trauma informed classroom with high school students. So I actually taught them mathematics, everyone's most hated subject, but it was a lot of fun, and we focused on trauma and well-being while teaching normal subjects for them to graduate high school. And then from there I transitioned into higher education, where I was the Indigenous Curriculum Specialist for RMIT, STEM College, and I did a number of years there just helping people to embed Indigenous perspectives into their curriculum and their courses and their programs to cater for all of our Indigenous students that would enrol in our courses. And then from there, I decided to do my PhD study in Indigenous education because as a teacher for many years and working in higher education, I noticed that Indigenous representation wasn't as vivid and as big as some of the other aspects of education. So it's a passion area of mine. I've lived it, I've breathed it. So that's sort of why I decided to do my PhD in Indigenous education and follow that suit. So. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, the Australian curriculum is making really great strides, and they've obviously incorporated the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures with cross-curriculum priorities. So that's a really great initiative, and that's been embedded quite well within the Australian curriculum and through the content descriptors, etc. So that's working quite well, but obviously there's a little bit of a gap where educators are finding it hard to then actually put that into practice within the classroom. So some of the feedback I've gotten from teachers in the past in this area is that maybe they weren't educated enough while they were doing their bachelor degree or their diploma or something like that. So they would have loved some more space in that area to be able to learn more about Indigenous culture and the ways to teach their Indigenous students. But then also they were saying that there was a bit of a gap in how they take that cross-curriculum priorities from the Australian curriculum and put that into practice in the classroom. There's sort of a bit of a training gap there. I think it's really important for teachers to collaborate with Indigenous elders and partners within the school community and not just do things off their own back if they can help it. So having that collaboration and that liaise between the school and the community elders and community partners is really, really vital to get feedback on what they can do and how they can do that respectfully. But some of the examples that I've given to people in the past is that you can say, for example, you're teaching science and it's about space and the stars. You can then link in Indigenous stories and dreaming about astrology and all of those aspects of the dreaming and how they believe certain things, spirituality, and how that helps them do weather events, to do seasons, to do hunting, etc., etc. So they could incorporate it in that sense as well. So that's just one example. Another example would be, obviously I taught mathematics, so that was a really fun subject for me to teach, and the way I did that is I used an Indigenous framework that I got taught, which was called the Yumi Deadly Maths. And that was a Queensland initiative at the time I was in Queensland, and we used hands-on and tactile experiences for the students so that when they were learning a particular concept, they could see it, they could touch it, they could use their body to actually enact the concept and really get to the bottom of what that concept was asking them. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think to be able to advance that, I think we need to make sure that we're not being tokenistic in what we're trying to embed in our classroom and our curriculum. So for example, tokenistic things could be something like, oh, I do the acknowledgement of country every day, or I do the acknowledgement for meetings, but that's all that's sort of done. Or I have a nice piece of Indigenous artwork in my room that makes them feel comfortable. So that's just really minor, examples of sort of tokenistic behaviour, if that makes sense. So to dive deeper, it would be great for schools to be able to, like I said before, engage with community elders and community members, get them involved in the school, make it an actual safe place for our Indigenous parents and students to feel welcomed into that. And we have to remember that institutions like that were not something that they were comfortable going to. So if we can include the community within school projects and within school initiatives, that would make them feel more at ease, to feel welcomed and just come onto the school grounds and help. Other things that the school could do as well is, like I said, embedding Indigenous perspectives within their curriculum more succinctly and across more key learning areas as well. But also, just making sure the students feel safe, and we stand up for things against like racism within schools, and we make sure that our Indigenous students see themselves in the curriculum. So that looks like many different things, which I'm sure we'll probably discuss. But yeah, make sure that they're seeing themselves in the curriculum and not just a westernized point of view as well. Yeah, for sure. So kinship is central to Indigenous social structures, their identity, their responsibility, relationships within communities. So it's quite a significant part in Indigenous culture. So the kinships guide and care for each other. It's about governance. It's about expressing through various traditions, all of those sort of things as well. So they're expressed through things like ceremonial practices, oral histories and oral stories. They're about family structures, and community structures. So things like child rearing is often something that comes up in the kinship structure. And I think schools having that understanding of, it may not necessarily be their biological mother or father coming to pick them up from school or attending meetings. It could be other members of the community that come to those important events or come to pick them up, because it is a part of our kinship culture that it does take a village essentially to raise the child. So everyone has a part. So I think that's a really important factor for schools to acknowledge as well. Obviously, I'm understanding that there are obviously legal requirements that they can't just send children home with people they have never met, but I think that's an understanding that when maybe the student enrolls, you can talk about who are their kinship partners and things like that, and having that understanding. But also having the understanding of the rituals that Indigenous people celebrate and mourn as well. So we've obviously got specific mourning rituals for when we lose family members, and that's often referred to as sorry business. So having that understanding that those things may happen, and students and or families or staff may be out for a significant time for sorry business, and that could come up quite unexpectedly. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then also that just the connection to country as well. I think that's a really important aspect for educators and for schools to know about that as well. Yeah, I suppose the main thing about that is schools prioritising truth telling. is the main thing I want to express that, and highlighting Indigenous voices in that space. So obviously we can't change Australia's history, you know, and the colonialism is part of that. But I think being able to see both sides and hear both sides of that history is really, really important. So ways teachers can sort of do that, or you know, sensitively do that, obviously teach those multiple perspectives. So yes, teach about, you know, Captain Cook and his first fleet, but then also talk about what impact that had on Indigenous Australians or Indigenous peoples back when they arrived, and what actually happened to that, because that's something that we don't learn about as Australian children, I suppose. So yeah, having that multiple perspective. Use Indigenous sources as well, which is really good. So things like oral histories, art pieces that they've created about colonial history. I know there's some beautiful art pieces about the first sighting of the first fleet, and there's some amazing art pieces and stories to go along with that. Look at literature and testimonials from elders and from journal entries and things from that time as well. As well as other resources, like there was a big thing called Hidden Histories. So that tells a lot about you know, colonialism and assimilation and things like that. And it has a lot of resources that teachers can actually use in the classroom to help students understand that process without it being too confronting. Yeah, so this is a very interesting topic, and this is one that comes up quite often because obviously, like you said, it's a part of Australian history, unfortunately, but the stolen generations and obviously the assimilation policies are quite a dark side of history. Obviously it's history and we need to learn about it, but it is quite dark and it is quite sensitive. So I think what people could do if they want to sort of touch on that and they want to teach that aspect to students, I think number one, like in previous comments, engage your local community and your local elders. Talk to them about how you want to teach this and how you think that they could help this situation, especially if you've got a population of Indigenous students in your classroom. It's quite traumatic for them because most of them have had family members that have been affected by the stolen generation and this assimilation policy. So, you know, giving them warning that, hey, this is what we're actually going to be teaching is really important. Engaging those Indigenous elders and community members to assure them that you know, they're here for support and well-being as well as input. You know, you could invite those elders and community members to come and share their stories about the impacts of the stolen generations and the assimilation policy. So, you know, having that first-hand account is often really moving and really touching for students as well. But just making sure that it's a sensitive topic and we are being really sensitive to not only the community, but the students that we have in our classroom as well. Yeah, obviously that's a really big major thing at the moment is teachers are afraid to get it wrong, and it's what I hear a lot from educators and their fear of offending you know, community and Indigenous students. So I suppose for them is, number one, do some of your own research. Make yourself feel comfortable in the space that you can feel confident to teach not only Indigenous students, but Indigenous history and culture. So do your own research, talk to community if you have that ties within the school, you know, get them to come in and do a cultural competencies session with the staff. So, you know, make those measures to make yourself feel comfortable and that you know what's happening in the space. The second thing would be about, you know, making sure that you've got resources available to you as well. So Indigenous resources, Indigenous scholars that you can count on, you know, anything like that that you can use at your disposal. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of organisations that help with that sort of thing as well. So yeah, getting those resources is really important as well. And then just have the confidence that if you do make a mistake, own it, you know, and don't be afraid to make a mistake, because if students see that you can make a mistake and then own it and correct it, that's, you know, that's really beneficial to students to be able to see that. And then they can then, you know, do the same thing if that ever happens in their life as well.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, I would say it would be a school initiative. So you don't want, you know, 50 odd teaching staff reaching out to the local community all in separate occasions. So for me, it would be a school-wide initiative where the principal or, you know, the Indigenous liaison, because I know a lot of schools have what's called an Indigenous liaison or equivalent to that, reaches out to community and invites them into the school, and it's that reciprocal relationship that you're going to earn for each other. So it's not about taking advantage of our community members. It's, you know, having that reciprocal relationship that they're welcome in, and, you know, being able to support them in that space as well. So yeah, definitely a school initiative thing to reach out to Indigenous community.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the main thing I think I said before is making sure that the Indigenous students can feel heard and seen in their classroom and within the curriculum. So if they can see their culture being represented within the classroom space, within the school space, and within the curriculum, it's already starting to make a safe environment for them to learn in and to work in. So that is my number one key point for educators and for schools out there, is making sure that they're in there. This could, you know, look like, it could be many different things which I've discussed before, but it could be resources, it could be setting up your classroom a little bit differently, it could be providing some tactile and hands-on initiatives for students to actually be part in, inviting those community members in. And then ensuring that your learning materials are of a mixed perspective as well. So you're not just having a westernised bunch of reading books for our students to read, but you're also having a range of Indigenous books that were written by Indigenous peoples as well. So I think that's really important as well, so that everyone is seen and everyone's heard in that space.